Welcome back. The GOP race for 2024 is well underway. One debate down, another in a couple of weeks, but the candidates are already focusing on the early voting states of Iowa and New Hampshire. There's a lot to talk about here. Let's do it with conservative strategist, head of Mason Borough Strategies, Luke Ball, up late with me tonight on the Final Five, live and in the flesh.
Yes, absolutely. Good to be here. Thank you.
Last time we had you on was over Zoom.
Yeah, it was over some sketchy Zoom Skype situation, but yeah, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you here tonight. So, hey, we're getting new insight about the state of the race here, and we were talking last night with a Democratic strategist about where Democrats feel about Joe Biden. One poll comes out and says Democrats feel that he's their best option going into 2024. But as you look at this GOP race, it is still Donald Trump's to lose, it seems, at this point.
Yeah, if the Republican race for president right now were a baseball game, we would have mercy ruled the entire field. If your name is not Donald Trump in this primary, and this is just a fact, you've either got an axe to grind, a book to sell, or an ego to stroke. He's 40 points ahead generally nationally in all of these polls. Now, we had one come out today that showed that there was some variation between some of the other candidates. We might jump into in a little bit. Right. But the fact is, and something we should really focus on, the electability argument was totally blown out of the water today by a CNN poll that showed that there was only a percentage point in between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and Trump was ahead. It was within the margin of error. And so when you look at this argument from the other candidates that say Donald Trump could not win in a general election, the electability argument falls flat, and a lot of their campaigns are pointing to that same poll to show why they would be best in this race.
I feel like we've heard that line before, though. In 2016, when people were saying, no way Donald Trump will get elected, and then what happened in November of 2016.
It's true, but one of the things that happened in that race is that the media gave him so much attention. They wanted to prop him up because they did not think that he had any possible chance, and so they gave him all that media coverage and showered him with that time up until the election day. I think that's happening right now. Every time that there's an indictment, he gets all of this free media coverage, which is lending to his ability to show himself that he's the consistent front runner.
Well, and also, just on that note, when you mentioned about the media, just the way they covered him, they covered him for the wrong reasons, because I think they didn't talk to people. They didn't talk to voters and say, why would you vote for Donald Trump? They didn't get into that. And that was why you had so many people on the national front shocked in 2016 on that election night. But let's talk about where things stand, because, you know, going into this year, before former President Trump announced he was getting into the race, everybody thought it was going to be Ron DeSantis at time. And look, here's a guy who aligned himself with former President Trump, was endorsed by former President Trump. The two of them were side by side. Trump campaigned for him. I mean, you can argue that Donald Trump is the reason that Ron DeSantis is governor of Florida in the first place. Why did he fall off so much?
Well, he is the reason that he's the governor, because I worked on that campaign, the gubernatorial general election down in Florida in 2018, and I was in there the days after that he was endorsed by Donald Trump, and Adam Putnam was the guy who was favored to win, and then when he was endorsed, or when DeSantis was endorsed by Donald Trump, he went up like 25 and 30 points. And then there was this poll that came out that showed that there was increasing support over and over into the general election, and I believe that that's why he won. Donald Trump is very big on loyalty, and so when he perceives that somebody has been disloyal to him, he goes after him with everything that he has. Trump was criticized early on for coming after DeSantis very early, but he knew that this was a target that he needed to shoot at, and it seems as if it's had an effect. And I also think that Donald Trump knows that Ron DeSantis does not really like campaigning. If you sit in the room with him, he does not have a persona of empathy. If you go sit in the Bluebird Diner in Des Moines, you're not going to give off those persona of, you know, enigmatic vibes. You're going to have this sort of back and forth that's a little stoic and less emotion when you're sitting in front of a voter. That doesn't translate very well when you have individual caucus goers who are trying to decide among a field of 8 or 9 who they want to vote for.
And one other thing is, when we talk about former President Trump and the indictments, he said himself, like, look, I just need another indictment. I'll lock up this nomination. It does not faze the Republican electorate at this point, and there are people, the Democrats would look at that and say, why is that not affecting his standing among voters?
Yeah, so the left-wing media was very upset today when they saw some of the most recent polls coming out that showed that Donald Trump was a percentage point above Joe Biden in this potential race. And I think it's very important to understand that when RFK Jr. announced, who I think is a foil right now in the Democratic race, he was polling at 14%, not among Democrat primary voters, but among Joe Biden's 2020 base. Joe Biden was only gaining 65% of his percentage points, and in 2020, Trump locked up as the incumbent 98% of the Republican vote in the Republican primary election. Joe Biden is still polling around 60 and 65% right now, and for the last 6 months it's not changed. That's raising some red flags among Democrats.
So in that same poll where we saw some of the other contenders out there, DeSantis, they looked at two factors. One, how they would do hypothetically in a matchup against President Biden, and then at the field, generally speaking. It looks as though Nikki Haley is the one who has gained the most since that debate. DeSantis never really had an opportunity to surge. Haley, in one of these polls, hypothetically would be up 6 points over Biden head-to-head. And if you look at how Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, she's now second, a distant second, but still second behind Trump, not DeSantis.
Yeah, within the margin of error, it comes down to maybe 3 and 4% within that time range. And I also think that when you look at the other polls that came out when they matched up those potential candidates with Joe Biden, they were very similar, but she was a little bit ahead. You also have to remember that there's this pesky little thing about the Electoral College, and we have Iowa, and among Iowa voters, she's polling at 6% right now to Donald Trump's 50%. So while this is a national poll, like 1,500 Republican voters and potential Republican voters, doesn't really speak to whether or not these people are going to turn out in a general election or in a primary election, what their propensity to go and vote is. It only focuses on this subset from leaning voters. And I think that when you look at some of the back and forth between the other candidates, it really shakes out to that electability argument we were talking about at the beginning.
Well, and then in a couple of months, we'll stop looking at this from a national perspective and focus on these little gymnasiums in Iowa as they get ready to caucus once again. That is Luke Ball. Luke, good to see you, man. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Appreciate
Great to see you. And the Final Five is back right after this.
Say the joker to the thief.